They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that money makes blood run thin. I'm Margaret, born in 1952 in Denver, Colorado. Back in 2019, when my husband passed, my son David begged me to move in with his family to help with childcare and expenses. I felt needed and loved, but then something happened. Today, at 72 and finally independent, I'm sharing this because every grandmother deserves respect in her own family. If you're listening, drop your location below and hit that subscribe button. When David first called me after the funeral, his voice cracked with emotion. "Mom, we need you," he said. "The kids miss Grandpa and honestly we're struggling with daycare costs. Would you consider moving in with us?" His wife Sarah chimed in on speakerphone. "We'd love to have you here, Margaret. The kids would be so happy." At that moment, sitting alone in the house where I'd spent 43 years of marriage, their invitation felt like a lifeline. I sold my house within 2 months and moved into their suburban Colorado Springs home. The arrangement seemed perfect initially. I had my own bedroom and bathroom, and I threw myself into helping with 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jake. Every morning, I'd wake up early to pack their lunches, braid Emma's hair, and drive them to school. Sarah worked as a marketing coordinator, and David managed a small construction company. Money was tight for them, but I had my nursing pension and some savings. Without being asked, I started covering expenses. First, it was groceries. I'd slip my card to the cashier before Sarah could protest. "Let me help," I'd say. "I'm eating here too." Then I began paying the electric bill, the water bill, and eventually Jake's preschool tuition. When their car needed repairs, I quietly transferred money to David's account. I wanted to contribute, to feel useful, to show my gratitude for having a place in their lives. For the first year, everything felt harmonious. Sarah would hug me and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom." David would beam with pride when neighbors complimented how well-behaved the children were. I felt like I was earning my place, proving my worth every single day. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started with small comments. When I suggested we try a different brand of cereal because it was healthier, Sarah would say, "Well, this is what we usually buy." When I offered to help redecorate the living room, she'd respond, "Thanks, but we have our own style." The word "we" became a wall between us, and I wasn't included in that "we." The exclusion became more obvious when they started a family group chat for household planning, without me. I'd overhear them discussing weekend plans or grocery lists, only to find out later that decisions had been made. When I asked about being added to the chat, Sarah laughed it off. "Oh, it's just for boring household stuff. You don't need to worry about that." But I was worrying about it. I was paying for most of that boring household stuff. My monthly contributions had grown to nearly $3,000, covering groceries, utilities, the children's activities, and even their family Netflix subscription. Yet somehow, I was being treated like a guest who shouldn't concern herself with household decisions. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I had just returned from grocery shopping, spending $200 on food for the week. As I unpacked the bags, Sarah walked into the kitchen and sighed dramatically. "You know, Margaret, maybe we should each buy our own groceries from now on. Just to be fair." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was already buying groceries for everyone, but now she wanted to make it seem like I was freeloading. That night, I lay in bed calculating everything I'd contributed over the past 2 years. Between direct payments and groceries, I'd spent over $60,000 supporting their household. Yet I was being made to feel like a burden, like someone who should be grateful for their charity. The final insult came the following week. I had labeled some of my personal food items in the refrigerator, my yogurt, my specialty, my diabetic-friendly snacks. When Sarah saw the labels, she called David over. "Look at this," she said, pointing at my carefully written name tags. "It's like we're roommates now." David just shrugged, but I caught the look they exchanged. A look that said I was becoming a problem they needed to solve. That evening, as I sat in my room listening to their muffled conversation downstairs, I realized something had fundamentally changed. I wasn't family anymore. I was a paying tenant who had overstayed her welcome. The grandmother who had sacrificed her independence to help them was now seen as an inconvenience. But what they didn't know was that I had one more card to play. A card that would change everything. The next morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. You see, what David and Sarah didn't know was that when I sold my house, I hadn't just moved in with them. I had also established a trust fund in their name. A substantial one. For 2 years, they had been living off monthly distributions from this fund without even realizing it. They thought my pension was just unusually generous. I called my financial advisor, Robert, who had handled my late husband's investments for decades. "Robert, I need to review the Henderson family trust," I said, my voice steadier than I'd felt in months. "I want to understand my options." Within an hour, I was sitting in his downtown office, staring at documents that revealed the full extent of my financial power. The trust contained $450,000. Money from my house sale, my husband's life insurance, and our combined retirement savings. I had structured it so that David's family received monthly distributions of $3,000, which I had been presenting as my contribution to household expenses. But here's what they never knew. I retained full control as the trustee. I could modify, freeze, or dissolve the trust at any time. "Mrs. Henderson," Robert said, adjusting his glasses, "you've been incredibly generous. Are you having second thoughts about the arrangement?" I told him everything, the exclusion, the disrespect, the way they made me feel like a burden while living off my money. His expression grew increasingly concerned as I spoke. "What are my options?" I asked. Robert explained that I could freeze the distributions immediately, requiring the beneficiaries to be notified within 30 days. I could also relocate the funds entirely. As I sat there, a plan began forming in my mind. Not born of spite, but of necessity. I needed to reclaim my dignity. That afternoon, I drove to a small apartment complex I had been quietly observing for weeks. It was a senior-friendly community with a beautiful garden and a sense of independence I desperately craved. I put down a deposit on a one-bedroom unit, available immediately. For the first time in months, I felt like I was making a decision for myself, not trying to earn my place in someone else's life. The confrontation came sooner than expected. 3 days later, Sarah cornered me in the kitchen while the children were at school. "Margaret, we need to talk," she said, her tone sharper than usual. "David and I have been discussing the living situation, and we think it might be time for you to consider other arrangements. You're lucky we let you live here, but you don't get a say under our roof." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Lucky? I was lucky to live in a house I was essentially paying for? Lucky to care for grandchildren while their parents worked? Lucky to be treated like an unwelcome guest in my own family? Something inside me snapped, but instead of anger, I felt a cold, clear determination. "You're absolutely right, Sarah," I said calmly. "I don't get a say under your roof, so I won't be under your roof much longer." Her expression shifted from smugness to confusion. She had expected tears, arguments, maybe pleading. She hadn't expected agreement. That evening I called Robert again. "Freeze the trust distributions effective immediately," I instructed, "and prepare the notification letters." Within 24 hours, David received a certified letter from the law firm explaining that the Henderson family trust distributions had been suspended pending review of the trust terms. I'll never forget David's face when he burst into my room that night, letter in hand. "Mom, what is this? What trust? What distributions?" For 2 years, he had assumed my contributions came from my nursing pension. He had no idea that a substantial trust fund had been supporting their entire lifestyle. "Sit down, David," I said quietly. I explained everything, the house sale, the trust establishment, the monthly distributions that had been paying for their groceries, utilities, and children's activities. His face went through a spectrum of emotions. Confusion, realization, and finally, something that looked like shame. "But Mom, why didn't you tell us?" he asked. "We thought you were just helping out with your pension money." I looked at my son, this man I had raised, loved, and supported, and realized he genuinely didn't understand the magnitude of what I had been doing. "Because I wanted to help," I said. "I wanted to be useful, to contribute, to earn my place in this family. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being your mother and became your tenant. A tenant who pays rent but gets no respect." Sarah appeared in the doorway, having obviously been listening. "Margaret, we never meant," she started, but I held up my hand. "Sarah, you told me I was lucky to live here and that I don't get a say. You were right. So I'm choosing to live somewhere else where I do get a say. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. I moved into my new apartment, taking only my personal belongings. The children cried when I explained I was moving to my own place, but I assured them they could visit anytime. What I didn't tell them was that their parents would now have to figure out how to afford their lifestyle without the trust fund distributions. Within a month, David called me, his voice strained. Mom, we're struggling. The mortgage, the daycare, everything. We didn't realize how much you were covering. I listened to my son's financial panic with a mixture of sadness and vindication. David, I said gently, you have two choices. You can learn to live within your actual means, or you can treat me like family instead of a burden. It took 3 months of financial struggle before they came to me with genuine apologies and a request to discuss reinstating the trust. But by then I had discovered something wonderful. I loved living alone. I had friends in my apartment complex, I took art classes, I traveled to visit my sister in Arizona. I had reclaimed my life. Today I maintain a relationship with my grandchildren, but on my terms. The trust remains frozen, and I've made it clear that respect isn't negotiable. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't hurting someone. It's simply refusing to let them hurt you anymore. If this story resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' treatment of them. Comment below with your own experiences. Sometimes we all need reminding that we deserve better. Wind down. Remember, dear hearts, your generosity should never diminish your dignity, and true family honors your contributions with gratitude, not entitlement.